before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story.
About 10 years ago, while I was studying in college, money was tight, and I desperately needed a job. One day, as I was passing by a 24-hour convenience store, I noticed a help wanted sign. They were looking for a cashier who could also take on light duties, like cleaning and organizing shelves. I thought it would be a perfect job for me since, as a woman, I wasn't good at heavy lifting. After checking the store's location, I found that it wasn't too far from my dorm, so I decided to apply. The store was a 3-story building. The ground floor was the convenience store, while the upper floors were used for stock storage. Upon entering, I met with the store manager, who asked me about my skills and experience. We chatted for a while, and then the manager asked if I could work the night shift because there were only 2 employees on duty, an assistant manager and a cashier. At that time, the night shift was severely understaffed because the night shift worker had already submitted his resignation, meaning the assistant manager would soon be left to work alone. The general manager explained that the night shift had a high turnover rate since few people wanted to work those hours. He asked if I would be willing to take the position, at least for a while. Since I needed a job right away, I agreed to take the night shift. On my first night at the job, I spent the evening doing small tasks here and there. By the time midnight rolled around, the store was nearly empty. More than 10 years ago, outside the city center, convenience stores are generally quiet at this hour, with hardly any customers. The assistant manager and I divided our tasks. He managed the stock in the back, while I took care of the front, watching over the store and handling the cash register. As the night dragged on, I kept myself busy restocking shelves and tidying up the counter. Not a single customer had entered for a while. Then, at around 1 a.m., the store's front doorbell suddenly chimed. I looked up as the door opened, and a man walked in. He wore a t-shirt and shorts. I greeted him as he entered. The man turned to smile, then walked straight to the books and magazines section in the corner of the store. He picked up a book and started flipping through it as he read. I returned to my spot behind the counter, expecting him to eventually bring the book over for checkout. But after some time, he remained where he was, absorbed in his reading. He didn't seem to have any intention of buying the book, but continued to read for his own entertainment. Figuring he was just browsing, I decided not to pay him much attention. I glanced down and continued wiping the counter. But when I looked up again a few moments later, I was startled. The man was gone. Puzzled, I scanned the store. He was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't help but wonder, how could someone disappear so quickly? If he had left the store, he would have had to pass the counter where I was standing, and I would have noticed him leaving. And even if I hadn't, surely the doorbell would have chimed. Curious and slightly uneasy, I stepped out from behind the counter and walked around the entire store, carefully checking every aisle. I thoroughly inspected every corner, but the man was nowhere to be found. I had no idea when he had left. I was quite surprised, but I tried to brush it off. I figured it was my first day, so I must have been too focused on cleaning, and simply hadn't noticed him leaving. The next night, I came to work as usual. Around the same time as the previous night, close to 1 a.m., the bell at the front door chimed again. When I looked up, it was the same man from the previous night. I greeted him, and he smiled at me before turning right and heading toward the books and magazines section. I recognized him instantly, not just his face, but his clothes. He was wearing the exact same t-shirt and shorts. Not a single detail was different. Determined not to lose sight of him this time, I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter, watching him closely. I kept my eyes locked on him, determined to see how he would leave the store. Besides, it was possible that he might be taking the items without paying. However, what I saw next made my heart pound in terror. As I observed him from head to toe, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. He had no feet. From the ankles down, there was nothing there, yet somehow he stood perfectly still. Doubt gripped my mind. Was I seeing things? I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. But nothing changed. The man had no feet. He was just standing there, as if nothing was wrong. Panic surged through me. Instinctively, I stepped back, rushed out from behind the counter, and moved behind a shelf, hoping to get a closer look from a different angle. I had to be sure I wasn't imagining it. But the moment I took my eyes off him for just a second and moved closer to the bookshelves, he was gone, completely vanished from sight. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Shock, confusion, and fear all at once. I had no idea what I had just seen. My hands trembled as I rushed to the back of the store to tell my assistant manager. But before I could even get the words out, the bell at the entrance chimed again. We both ran to the front, but the store was empty. With growing unease and doubt, I decided to tell my assistant manager what I had seen. But before I could say much, he cut me off, simply telling me to focus on work and talk about it later. So, we went back to our tasks and worked until morning. But the mystery lingered in my mind, refusing to let go. I needed answers. The next day, I decided to check the CCTV security footage from around 1 a.m., the exact time when the strange events had occurred. What I saw made my blood run cold. The footage clearly showed the store's front door opening by itself, yet no one entered. I could have blamed the wind for this, but the next scene left me in a shock. The figure I see on the screen is actually me, greeting empty air as if welcoming a customer. The footage captured me standing and staring at the books and magazine section in the corner of the store, exactly where, in my memory, the man had been standing. But on the CCTV screen, there was nothing. The security camera had recorded nothing. There was no man, not even for a second. At that moment, I felt my skin crawl. Whatever I had encountered, it was not a human. By the third night, I was no longer just waiting for the strange event to happen. Now that I knew what to expect, I decided that around 1 a.m., I would excuse myself to the restroom, leaving my assistant manager at the counter instead. As the minutes crept toward 1 a.m., the store grew eerily silent. Not a single customer came in. I left the counter and walked toward the back door to tell my assistant manager to take cover at the counter. But when I tried to push it open, it wouldn't budge. I jiggled the handle. It was locked from the inside. Confused, I knocked. "Open the door, please," calling out for my assistant manager to let me through. No response. Just then, I heard the sound of the doorbell chime. My hair stood on end. Slowly, I turned my head toward the front of the store, and there he was. The same man, entering just as he had before. But this time, I noticed something different. He wasn't walking. He was floating. His feet, still missing, hovered just above the ground as he glided inside. He smiled at me, then drifted toward the books and magazine section in the corner, taking his usual spot. A chill crawled up my spine. I pounded on the back door, calling out for my assistant manager. No answer, just silence. Overcome by fear, I made a split-second decision. I turned and ran, straight for the front door. Bursting outside, I stumbled onto the pavement, gasping for air, my vision blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. But it wasn't over. When I finally dared to look back into the store, I saw him, still there, still reading, standing or floating, right where he had always been. My mind spiraled with questions. Was he a ghost? Why was he just standing there? And what does he want? I stood frozen, trapped in the moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, the man slowly lifted his face, looked outside the store, and locked eyes with me through the glass. And then, he smiled, before vanishing completely before my eyes. At that moment, I could only stand there, frozen, overwhelmed with shock. I couldn't help but burst into uncontrollable sobs. I had never felt such terror before. Still in disbelief, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, unable to process the reality of it. After what felt like an eternity, the assistant manager stepped out from the front of the store and tried to comfort me. He reassured me that there was nothing to worry about, urging me to come back inside and focus on work, saying we could talk about it in the morning. I pulled myself together and walked back inside, trying to regain my composure. As customers started coming in, I gradually, almost unconsciously, began to push the incident to the back of my mind. The next morning, after our shift ended, the assistant manager invited me to have a meal with him. Over breakfast, I finally had the chance to share everything I had experienced. However, as he listened, his face remained calm and indifferent. He didn't seem the least bit surprised by my story. When I finished recounting the events, he simply said,
"The man you saw is the regular customer. Every employee who works here has encountered him. But don't worry, he doesn't do anything. He just comes to read books for a while and then disappears on his own. There's no need to be afraid. Just let him be, and he'll let you be."
Even after learning about this, I continued working at the convenience store as usual because I needed the money. However, I came up with a plan to avoid running into him again. Now, knowing what to expect, I would walk to the back of the store around 1 a.m., when he typically showed up, and switch places with the assistant manager until the man disappeared. I continued this routine until I found another job not long after, and I never returned to that convenience store again. Months later, I happened to pass by the area and was surprised to see that the store had relocated. The new location was only about 10 stores down from the original spot. Curious, I stepped inside and saw the assistant manager still working there. We chatted for a bit, and I asked why the store had moved. The assistant manager explained that the old store's back wall was right up against a temple, and not far beyond that was a crematorium. During the time the store had been operating there, employees had kept quitting one after another. The business didn't seem to be doing very well either. Eventually, the owner decided to seek out a fortune teller. The fortune teller assessed the location and said it was a path for ghosts to pass through. Not a very good spot. He strongly advised relocating. Taking this advice, the owner decided to move the store to its current location. Out of curiosity, I asked, "What about that regular customer? Does he still come here?" The assistant manager replied that since the shop moved here, he had never seen that man again. However, there was something strange that happened before the store was relocated. After I submitted my resignation, the store hired a new male employee to replace me. He was only in his late teens, and perhaps because of his age, he wasn't the most responsible worker. He often slacked off, spending his time playing games while sitting down, instead of paying attention to customers or doing the actual work. One night, around 1 a.m. as usual, the regular customer walked into the store. This happened for 3 or 4 consecutive days. However, since the new employee wasn't paying much attention, he didn't notice anything unusual about the man. All he saw was that this customer came in, stood reading books for a while, and never bought anything. Feeling a bit annoyed, the new employee sarcastically blurted out,
"If you're just going to stand there reading for so long, you might as well bring a mat and a pillow and just sleep here."
The moment he finished speaking, the store was suddenly filled with a foul, rotting stench. He looked around, trying to figure out where the smell was coming from. As his eyes wandered, they finally landed on the spot where the man's feet should have been, only to realize he had none. His gaze traveled upward, and he saw that the man's skin was turning a dark, decayed green. But what was even more terrifying was that the man slowly turned his head toward him. His face was horribly disfigured, green, bloated, and rotten. At that moment, the new employee lost all composure. He screamed at the top of his lungs, yelling, "Ghost! Ghost!" The entire store echoed with his terrified cries. Hearing the commotion, the assistant manager rushed out from the back of the store, trying to calm him down. But after that night, the new employee immediately quit the job.